In 2014, I was told that I could not have children. While not impossible, the likelihood, at least according to Western medical sciences, was highly improbable. In fact, so unlikely was it that Alicia and I would have children that we were almost immediately provided all of the different solutions for our problem. Now, obviously, we were at a crossroads and had a choice to make. Would we choose to take the feedback that we had received and take that as fact, or would we rather place that energy and belief within ourselves? So, what happened? Well, join me today as we dive into the 7 principles that transformed our and can absolutely support you in transforming your lives as well. Aloha mai kako, Michael Kiolamau Tengan with Season 1, Episode 1 of this podcast. Now, most people are familiar with the whole concept of the law of attraction. Those same people, at least most of them, are not as familiar with the fact that this law is actually a sub law of 7 other different principles. Now, the Hermetic principles, as we're going to be talking about today, comes from the Kybalion and contains the wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, which is a very enigmatic figure, very curious figure, because this figure, this archetype, one that bridges between humanity and divinity, providing these tools consciously to be able to create in our lives, is a reoccurring figure and image, whether we're talking about Thoth in terms of Egyptian mythology, or we're talking about Mercury in Roman culture. Even here locally in Hawaii, we have Maui, who is the that demigod in between both of these areas. And so we see this figure coming out and emerging as someone who really helps and supports humanity to learn the wisdom, the intelligence, the tools and the techniques that have been used from time immemorial. And so for us, one of the things that we did was work with these, although not necessarily consciously at the time. This really was the event that, for me at least, was the spark that really inspired me to find out more. And really, the 7 Hermetic principles that we're going to be talking about today is part of that whole process for me in terms of that emerging wisdom and how I really have found myself here now making this podcast even. And so back in 2014, we obviously were presented with a choice, and I dare say an opportunity to really grow and evolve for ourselves. Now, we tend to see that in this whole process of awakening is that there is an event that happens that challenges our dominant worldview. For us, it was being freshly married in 2013. That was a part of something that both of us had wanted in our marriage, was to have children. Now, all of a sudden, we are confronted with, a quote unquote truth. The question is, and this is where these principles really come to help and support, is that we had a choice to make, and more than just a choice, from that rude awakening, we had a choice, which is that second stage. We had a reckoning. We were going to either choose to believe in the feedback that we had received, or we were going to focus upon our capacity to conceive. Now, we chose the latter of those two, which then really went into this openness. We had no idea how. However, we were willing to surrender to the process. And as we surrendered to the process, then we went into this stage of emergence, the emerging wisdom, the emerging love, the emerging capacity to enter into that creative space. And so that openness and that letting go and that release and that surrender is really very important, because then what happens is all of a sudden, beyond, often well beyond our own imagination, then things happen. And these phenomena, as they happen, tend to be phenomenal. And so as we allowed that to happen, we went into that fourth stage, which was a matter of integration. We really created a practice around a process, and these processes were seeped in these principles. Now, what are these principles, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. Well, the first one, principle number one, is the principle of mentality. And this is, I like to best embody this whole concept in to think is to create. If we are capable of imagining it, then it is something that is accessible to us in our lives. And so part of that, in terms of more of the day-to-day pieces, was having a vision of what it is that we wanted. For myself, I would close my eyes every day, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, and I would go into that mental space. Although it was far more than mental. There was emotions that were poured in. There was a feel and an energy to it. And so I'd go into that space and see the two of us, we would be in the room, there would be the smells and the sounds, there would be smells and these sounds that could better immerse in this perfect moment. And as I immersed in this perfect moment, reaching out to actually touch, to feel the warmth of our child held against my body, to feel even more deeply than the love and the adoration that came along with this. As I went into that space, each and every day, the thing that really was amazing is that this perfect moment, this quantum event became my reality. And as that happened, we go into the second principle. The second principle is one of correspondence. As above, so below, as within, so without. And in this case, it was a matter of holding with inside of myself the knowingness that this moment and event was as real. I would even say more real than the feedback that I had been given. Now, that feedback, again, the fact that we would not be able to have children, and that was on me. My sperm count was so low in terms of their readings that the statistical probability was pretty, it wasn't null, but it was pretty close. And so I knew that I knew that I knew, especially as I continued to go into this mental space, that this perfect moment is reality. And so to stay in that place, part of what really helped then was the third principle, which is the principle of vibration. Now this stipulates that everything is in motion and that we determine the oscillation, the frequency, the vibration of said motion. And so, say for example, if I were going into that mental space again, going into my, realm of the mind and that vision, and I know that it's real, and what if then, in this case, I started to feel feelings of fear? Oh, doubt. What if it's not real? What if this is all just BS? Which I absolutely did. Switching from that place of fear and into a space of love drastically altered my state of being. And so, say for example, I wanted to go for a run. And say I had just woke up super sleepy. I need to build myself up, get myself more loose and able, get myself in that mental space to be able to take this run on. I may go out on that run. However, if I'm not feeling all that great to begin with, then I may not actually run all that well. I might increase my chance of injury. I may trip and fall. I may be just chugging along, which I absolutely have done, just hating every step of it. This is drastically different than if I were looking forward to that run. I was up, I was ready, much like this morning. I got up and I was excited about it. The morning, the crisp morning air, the sounds of the birds, like hitting the ground with my feet and getting into a stride and a rhythm. Now that's a very different feel, especially when I infuse then the energy of my desire to be there in the first place. So as all this happens then, going into the fourth, which is the principle of polarity. Now, the principle of polarity talks about the full spectrum of all things. The full spectrum of all things looks at specifically, it's rather than being a world of either or, sort of this binary yes or no, true or false. We really exist in a full spectrum of life. And that spectrum of life means that anything and everything is possible. If we're in one area, we can absolutely shift into the other. Put differently, there are polarities, positive and negative, in all things. And our capacity to access both of those comes into play when we are, as I like to say, able to manage our mana. We're aware of our energy, we're aware of the sensations and our feelings, and we're able to switch and flip that in any given moment. Going on to the fifth now principle is one of cause and effect. Now, when we look at cause and effect, obviously it seems to be pretty straightforward. However, often we look at right now is the effect of multiple causes. Rarely do we recognize the wisdom that yes, that is true, and we in this moment can be the cause for a new effect. Now, going one step further into the sixth principle, that of the principle of rhythm, everything has an ebb and a flow. And we'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. Yet, like the changing of the seasons, there's a time when we want to plant our seeds of intention, and there's times when we want to fully place our attention upon that intention and switch that into action. Lastly, the principle of gender talks about the masculine and feminine aspects of all things. We'll get on to this one a little bit more in a bit because this one takes a little bit more explanation to truly connect. And when we do connect, though, it really is an inspiration.